Okay. Good morning, everyone. I guess it's about 9, so I'll go ahead and get started. So I just want to start by saying thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. I really enjoyed CBCrypto last year, and now with more participants, I'm excited to hear all the talks. So today I'll talk about the current state of the NIST PQC process and the largely Oscar-winning film Everything Everywhere All at Once title just seemed like the perfect description of the process today. So
just click.
Use
You just
the
need to click in the slides once, then it should work. Just can you try it now?
Okay, so this is the NIST PQC process. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We're a non-regulatory federal agency under the US Department of Commerce. When it comes to cryptography, the NSA is tasked with creating all the standards for national security systems, and NIST is responsible for all the cryptography that goes into other government federal entities outside of national security systems, largely because our mission is to promote basically innovation and things like that. So this first cryptographic standard was released in the 1970s, DES, creatively named the Data Encryption Standard. It was not designed by NIST, it was submitted by IBM, and NIST converted that into an encryption standard. DES is a symmetric key algorithm, but ever since then, NIST continues to evolve its cryptographic standards. And we're definitely proud of the fact that all of our devices and ATMs and all sorts of products are using this standardized algorithms. So DES was symmetric encryption. And we know that when it comes to symmetric schemes, there's like key distribution challenge that must first be tackled. So for encryption, the sender and the recipient are using the same shared secret key. The sender encrypts with the same key and the receiver decrypts with the same key, but that puts a requirement that they both must have established a key prior to running the encryption scheme. And for authentication, data authentication, the sender uses a key to generate a message authentication code, and the receiver will use the same key to verify. So of course, in both instances, key distribution can be challenging or sometimes exceedingly challenging when you have many-to-many communication network. And today we use cryptography for secure communication like TLS or internet key exchange. And what we're essentially doing is using the public key component to establish the keys and authenticate, and then using symmetric key cryptography after that to encrypt and authenticate both data, largely because it's less expensive to encrypt in this way. So in the 1970s, of course, we had major cryptographic breakthroughs. The first of which was the paper by Walt Diffie and Wilhelm Hellman, which discovered a way to establish cryptographic keys through a non-secure channel. So a public channel in which there are eavesdroppers and there's no shared secret key. We know their result was based on the hardness of the discrete logarithm problem. And soon after, the RSA encryption scheme by Revest, Shamir, and Adelman also presented an algorithm that required no shared secret key prior to running the algorithm. There was in parallel a system developed a few years prior, but it was classified at the time, so folks didn't know about it. But either way, the RSA encryption is based on integer factorization. And here are some of the NIST public key standards that are based on integer factorization, discrete logarithm, This one was just updated not long ago. And unfortunately, we know that quantum computers or full-scale quantum computer can break all of these algorithms. Why? Because Peter Shor discovered the Shor's algorithm that has significantly smaller costs for factoring than classical algorithms. And so we know that this is the present threat. So none of these standards, which are we're so proud of, that are being used all over the world, will be secure long term. There's been a lot of discussion about when will the quantum computer be developed. This is not my area of research. Some experts predict in 10 to 15 years. There's all sorts of headlines that come out. But from this perspective, it doesn't exactly matter when it will happen. We're just going to start preparing now. And the plan is to find algorithms that are secure against both classical and quantum attacks. So we're not focused on quantum algorithms. We are still focused on classical algorithms, but we just want them to be secure against any quantum attack. So post-quantum cryptography captures several research areas that are believed to have problems that are difficult for a quantum algorithm to solve. Lattice-based, code-based, multivariate, isogeny. So of course, we're here to talk about code-based. Okay, so to address the problem, NIST took the approach of we are not going to declare what the standard will be. Instead, we'll sort of manage a process in which the community contributes proposals, and NIST sort of manages and herds the process in the direction towards community consensus in an open, transparent, and timely manner. The call was for digital signatures and encryption or key establishment. We received initially 82 submissions from all across the world with a couple of selection criteria. Number one, we've already said we want secure against both classical and quantum attacks. And also there's a focus on performance, measured on several platforms, hardware, software, et cetera, how they perform in internet protocols. And then there were other properties that were sort of ideal, the dream. It would have been nice to just have drop-in replacements that could be compatible with all existing protocols and networks. It would have been nice to just have one algorithm that could be suitable for all of these properties. Also perfect for secrecy, resistance to side channel attacks. There's been increasing research in side channel attacks, which is very helpful to push the algorithms in the most secure direction, but also makes it pretty challenging for designers and implementers to be sure to safeguard against all of these. Another property that we would like is the simplicity. So algorithms that are less likely to cause implementation error or introduce vulnerabilities accidentally. Also flexibility, if we need to scale up at a certain point, or if algorithms need to be tweaked in a certain way, it would be nice for the algorithms to be easily flexible to meet the new goals. So here's a bit of a timeline. The call for proposals came out in 2016, and about a year later, there were 82 submissions. Not all the submissions were declared complete and proper. So when round one began, there were only 69 official candidates. We held the first NIST, I wasn't at NIST yet, but the first NIST PQC conference was held co-located with CBCrypto 2018. And then in 2019, the list of candidates was cut from 69 to 26. There were a number of attacks that came out naturally. The community was very involved. There were also just a number of algorithms that were less competitive than others. So the cut from round 1 to round 2 was less challenging. Then in round 3, the cut from the 26 candidates was reduced to basically 15 candidates, but we separated those submissions into 2 categories, finalists and alternates. The reasoning behind that is some algorithms we felt were much more standards, almost standards ready, like capable of being standardized in the near future, whereas the alternates sort of seem like maybe more research, maybe the performance isn't as nice, different reasons. And as we'll see later, these 2 buckets were not 100% correct. We ended up selecting an alternate for standardization, and it was a finalist that was broken. So this is where things stood in 2020. And then this past summer, we announced the selection of the first 4 algorithms to be standardized. And we left 4 algorithms to be considered in the 4th round. And then in the fall, we announced a call for additional digital signatures. So today, NIST is working on our draft standards. We plan to release them this summer. Then that would be followed by some sort of public comment period, about 3 months. We're also in the process of analyzing the 4 remaining candidates. Technically, only 3 candidates are still under consideration. And those 3 that are still under consideration are all code-based. And we're also running the on-ramp, so the call for additional digital signatures is happening all in parallel today. So first, I'll talk about the draft standards that we're working on. So each algorithm that we've selected will be its own document. They're all going to be FIPS. Each algorithm will be given a standardized name, so we won't keep the Crystal's Kyber name. We'll just change them to something more general. There were a lot of considerations. Some we are still considering, some we've made decisions on, because we had the round 3 specification, but when it's time to convert that into the standard, there were questions like which parameter sets should we include in the standard, which hash functions, every specific detail had to be included in the standard. Also, we wanted to make sure that submission teams could suggest changes. We've tried to be very transparent and put all of these considerations on the forum to allow people to chime in and give their opinion of things that we should be aware of. But in the end, any changes from the round 3 specification to the FIPS draft will be discussed publicly. So the plan, like I said, is to release the draft standards for Crystal's Kyber, Crystal's Dilithium, Falcon, and Sphinx Plus by the summer, so within the next few months. We anticipate there being about a 3-month public comment period, to hopefully give everyone a chance to analyze all of the details and voice any concerns or things we should consider. After that, there's a long process for the FIPS to go through all of the levels of approval up through the Department of Commerce secretary, but we do anticipate that the new standards will be finalized in 2024, hopefully the first half of 2024. So this is where things stood at the beginning of round 3. We had our 7 finalists and 8 alternates. We ended up selecting Sphinx Plus, which was an alternate. Rainbow was broken, which was a finalist. We selected 1 Kim Kyber, and 3 signatures, which I'll explain more about that decision later. But there was definitely a lot of attention on this, a lot of media coverage, especially after this point. Any attack was even more amplified in the media. So it was almost confusing people about how confident we should be in the process. I think some people were misunderstanding what the process is for. There's also, so we announced in July, but there was also before and after lots of activity coming down from the executive department of the US. So there's a national security memo in May 2022 that pretty much outlined a plan for how the US government should prepare for the PQC transition, beginning with more collaboration between the government and industry partners. So it was declared that the NCCOE, the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is affiliated with NIST, but it is not a government agency, would help spearhead that. So guidance from the NCCOE and this migration project is available, and more is coming. Then in November, so 6 months later, the Office of Management and Budget, which is an executive agency, offered more specific guidance as to how federal agencies need to comply with the National Security Memo. So there were very specific preparatory steps, and it seemed like the timeline that's being alluded to is that we finish this transition by 2035. So there are a lot of pointers to this year. We need to be aware of what systems there are. The first step is to take an inventory of all of cryptographic systems and what's being used and make this plan. So this is very interesting to see outside of the scientific community, in government, other areas of the government taking this as a priority. And then in December, there was legislation, the quantum readiness legislation, that means now Congress has been involved and is also on board with preparing everyone for this PQC transition. So the NCCOE migration project, like I said, their plan is to help complement our standards process. So once we complete the standards, they want everyone to be ready to coordinate with other standards bodies, industry collaborators, to make sure that folks are capable of actually implementing the standard and making sure once it's time to be fully quantum ready, folks know whether they are or not. So this migration project has a number of deliverables that are in development or preparing to help with the transition. They plan to release practice guides, playbooks, proof of concept code, all sorts of things. They're going to have public events. So if you'd like more information or you want to get involved, that's their contact, because this will definitely continue even after the standards have been drafted. Okay, so we also have round 4. There were 4 remaining algorithms: Bike, HQC, Classic McLeese, and Psych. We know that the Psych was broken because this is a fundamental design, a fundamental part of the design that just cannot be tweaked. So the Psych team acknowledges that Psych is insecure and should not be used. So the last 3 under consideration are the 3 code-based things: Bike, Classic McLeese, and HQC. There hasn't been much change for the code-based chems. In round 2, we know LitaCrypt was broken, NTS Chem was merged with Classic McLeese, Bike and HQC were still there, and there's been no change from round 3 to round 4. So there's pretty much been not much changing in the code-based KIM space. So first, I'll talk about bike slightly. So bike is a moderate density parity check code based algorithm with quasi-cyclic structure. Of course, that's to reduce the size of the key, make it much more affordable than comparative to classic McAleese. Bike is based on binary linear codes. And it's basically takes the meter-writer approach. Encryption at a very high level is done by encoding a message into an error vector where the ciphertext would be the syndrome. And Bike was initially designed just for ephemeral use, but around round 2 and then finally around 3, there was the NCCA security claim that Bike should be NCCA secure. We know that in the CCA setting, we have to consider the Boyle, Johansson, and Stankowski attack, the key recovery attack that exploits decoding failures. To prevent that attack, you need the DFR to be sufficiently low. So, of course, direct computation at even 128 bits of security is infeasible. Work has been done to compute average DFR for smaller security levels and then use extrapolation techniques to approximate at larger block sizes. But we know that the graphs of DFRs on a log scale for low and moderate density parity check codes with iterative decoders display this waterfall error floor phenomenon. So basically, the DFR might drop off, let's say quadratically, and then sort of plateau. This is important because if the extrapolation doesn't accurately characterize the error floor, you could underestimate what your decoding failure rate is. So you could project that the DFR is here when in fact it's here. So that is something, some work has been done to take a look at. We'll hear more about that later today. But basically, to accurately predict the Bike DFR, we have to consider the error floor behavior. Bike does have the most competitive performance. Here I only have bandwidth. There's slightly more advantage for HQC when it comes to some of the clock cycles, but for bandwidth, we see that Bike is pretty balanced. The ciphertext is larger than classic McAleese, but the public key is dramatically smaller. When you compare Bike with HQC, it's pretty comparable. HQC does have smaller private key, but the ciphertext is still smaller than HQC. So Bike definitely has a very competitive performance profile. But NIST encourages more vetting of the NCCA security. NIST realizes that there's been a lot of focus on the on-ramp for digital signatures, but we definitely want to make sure that there's still attention being given to the remaining KIMs, because there won't be, or at least we don't plan on there being an on-ramp for KIMs. So these are the last KIMs. We'd like a lot of attention to go on those, on all aspects of security. So classic McAleese is a code-based KIM that uses binary GAPA codes. The use of the GAPA code gives perfect correctness, so there is no DFR concern at all. And it's also based on a meter-writer variant of the original McAleese crypto system. Because classic McAleese adheres so closely to the original McAleese, there's a lot of confidence in the security. McAleese has such a long history of stability outside of using the wrong code. But when it comes to using with the proper code, there's a nice history of not having attacks. The best known attack is information set decoding. And this is not even close to polynomial or anything like that. Classic McAleese has the smallest ciphertext, but the largest public keys, which we're all aware of, is a big drawback. Even if you go for a level 1, this is still 10 times larger than HQC. So what NIST really wanted to focus on, although NIST felt that Classic McAleese could be ready for standardization, the question is, what are specific use cases for Classic McAleese? So we posed this in the round 3 report. We emphasized it at the last conference and on the forum. So some of the feedback we got on specific use cases for Classic McAleese was VPNs. Why? Because there's only a certain number of connections needed to be made per day. There's a nice breakdown. Someone gave an estimate. If you take just a basic home Wi-Fi connection for someone working from home, connecting to work 4 to 5 times a day. The point of the VPN is already additional security being prioritized. So the expectation is that nobody, or perhaps folks would be more willing to deal with the overhead of using Classic McAleese. But after the workout of the post on the forum, it was clear that it's not as expensive as it might sound, since the large public key is only sent once, and then after that, you're just doing your short-term keys. Other things people gave feedback on was just compatibility with BSI, a German standards body. I guess the idea is that BSI plans to move forward with standardizing Classic McAleese. And if NIST standardizes Classic McAleese, then there's this, everyone can agree on the same parameter sets, et cetera, and have some interoperability. Other folks mentioned HSMs and high-speed optical networks. Obviously, any high bandwidth application would be suitable, or has to be. It has to be a high bandwidth application to handle the large public key. So this is still interested in any additional feedback on Classic McAleese, because it does take significant resources to develop a standard, and we want to make sure that if we're developing the standard, that it will be used. And the third chem that's left is HQC. HQC is based on QCMDPC codes, but there's no trapdoor hidden in the code. So the private key itself is not, so the secret key is randomly sampled. The encryption is sort of like an LWE instance, where you have a pair of random values, and your public key is like a linear combination of those. So the motivation behind HQC was to get a more direct security reduction to decoding a random linear code. Like, for example, in Classic McAleese, the private key, the public key is a scrambled version of the private key. But in HPC, there is no relation in that way. The secret key is independent of the code choice, and therefore the security reduction is independent of the choice of decoder. However, HQC requires much larger bandwidth. The operations are cheap. Keygen is more expensive with Bike. But when you compare the numbers, it seems that HQC does have small additional costs, But we're very confident in the DFR for HQC because there's a nice closed form analysis of the decoding failure probability. Whereas with bike, we don't necessarily have that. So the last part of the current state of the NIST PQC is the call for additional digital signatures. So NIST did already select 3 digital signatures, and it would seem that 3 is plenty. But 2 of the digital signatures are both based on structured lattices, and then we have Sphinx Plus. So dilithium is much simpler. Falcon, we feel, is more complicated to implement and could introduce implementation errors or foot cannons, as they're called. But Falcon does have smaller signatures. So if it turns out that the data and the signature need to be sent in the same packet, we believe that Falcon would be the better choice over dilithium. This is a graph that tries to convert all of the overhead into one metric. So the conversion was 2,000 cycles per byte. And you can see that dilithium turns out to be quite a bit more expensive than Falcon. But Falcon uses like the floating point arithmetic. It just seems a lot more complicated to implement. So NIST felt, although we said we plan to standardize at most one of dilithium or Falcon, but we realized that it'd be much more useful to standardize both. And because both of those were based on structured lattices, and we pretty much ran out of signatures, Rainbow was broken. We had Picnic and Sphinx Plus. Picnic and Sphinx Plus were pretty compatible performance-wise, but Sphinx Plus had more confidence in the security. Rainbow is, I'm sorry, Picnic was a little bit newer. So we chose to standardize Sphinx Plus as well. And so the main reason for calling for additional digital signatures is to diversify the signature portfolio. Sphinx Plus is not necessarily a general purpose KIM. I'm sorry, a general purpose digital signature. So the deadline for submissions for additional digital signatures is June 1st. This should be, so the scope is much more well-defined. We know exactly what we need to enhance the signature standards portfolio. These signatures will be on a different track than the 4th round KIMs. And we're most interested in general purpose digital signatures that are not based on structured lattices. So we've tried to make that very clear. There are a lot of, it's difficult sometimes as a researcher, you find something that's actually very interesting and novel, but when it comes to the standard, we have to be a bit more practical and focus on the exact need that needs to be met. But we're still open to receiving schemes that are based on structured lattices, so we'll just see. We had an early call for completeness. If submitters wanted to submit their packet early for preliminary feedback from NIST as far as is everything there, is it complete and proper? We received about 20 of those, and when it was the beginning of the NIST PQC process, there were about 40 early packages submitted early, and there ended up being 82 submissions. So if it turned out to be about double, then we might expect 40 digital signature submissions. From there, we'll have to look at them and see which are complete and proper. And then once we figure out which ones are complete and proper, we will put those on the website. So I thought this was going to be a really long talk, and it's pretty short. But NIST is very grateful to the PQC community for the effort, participation, cryptanalysis, experiments, benchmarks, all sorts of things. Both the submission teams and the folks who might break the schemes. We're very grateful to the community. We're still interested in more use cases that are best fit to Classic McAleese. Still interested in security analysis of bike. Once the standards are released, we'll definitely be looking for public comments on those. Of course, the on-ramp for additional signatures and feedback. If you see questions on the forum about considerations to change something from a round 3 specification to the standard, feedback on those algorithm changes, we're still interested in hearing those. Ways to get connected if you are not already. There's the PQC project page that has all of the relevant documents. Each round, there's a report that's come out at the end of round 1. There was a round 1 report that explained the decisions. Same with round 2 and round 3. The call for proposals are on there. Every time NIST had a NIST PQC standardization conference, we posted the slides from all the talks. The virtual ones, we have the recordings online as well. So there are a lot of resources on the project webpage. We definitely encourage folks to use them. The submission packages are on there as well. You can email official comments to pqccomments@nist.gov or join the join the PQC forum for announcements and discussion. And then the NCCOE migration projects, there's their contact as well. So thank you.